Next up is Dr. Matt Kim from Quanterra. Round of applause, please, for Matt. Let's show him the love here. Now, Matt is the founder and president of Quanterra, which specializes in developing nano-engineered quantum-based devices for photonic applications. The company focus is to develop manufacturing lasers, detectors, driver amplifiers, and photonic integrated circuits. And if I knew what half of that stuff meant, I'd be much smarter. He's also the chairman of the Arizona Nanotechnology Cluster. It's a nonprofit organization for advancing nanotechnology issues in Arizona. In 2000, Matt co-founded Microlink Devices, a leading manufacturer of transistors for cellular communications in Niles, Illinois. He was vice president of operations, and he supervised the transistor manufacturing program, which ultimately resulted in vendor qualification at major telecommunications companies. From 1994 to 2000, Matt was principal staff scientist at Motorola's corporate research laboratory, demonstrating transistors with a very high grain, which were used in Motorola cell phone technology. At the 2006 Governor's Celebration of Innovation, he received the Chairman's Award for contributions to Arizona's high-tech industry. Now, Matt holds a PhD in physics from the University of Illinois and a BS in engineering physics from Cornell University. And after that, I think we got to give him another hand, huh? Matt, I can't see you, but I can feel you down here. Now, you are truly both a scientist and an entrepreneur, and this combination is becoming a lot more common today, but there are some very different skill sets needed for those two disciplines. And how do you combine the two of those, then, for such success that you've had?
It's a pleasure being here. That's a very interesting question, because most scientists, that people think about are not very versed in things that actually are entrepreneurial, because science is very fact-based, is very organized, and doing business is completely the opposite. And, the point about timing, that's very important in business. There's an opportunity, there's a window. And I think really what happens is there's a point where you get in science where you get to a level where you're very competent in certain skill sets. At that point, you can either continue on and be a comfortable life, but there's a point where you make a decision. I think it happens to numerous people that way, is they'll get to a point where they say, I can't do this with the science at the company that I'm allowed to do. And what will happen is then you start thinking about where you really want to take this science. And when you're at Motorola, there's certain restrictions that happen to me, and if you want. So then what you have to do, I think, is you have to have, for most science, like a kick in the butt, because you'll have a friend who says, you know what, he'll be a little bit crazier, and that's what happened to me. Is that's how I started my first company. Is I had a crazy friend. He said, we can do this easy, we'll make millions. And I'm like, are you sure about this? And when you think about it, it gets to the point where you've done a lot, and you have the basis of a lot of technology, and you then say to yourself, well, I can implement it, with this company, or I can actually try to do new, a little bit of exploring, a journey. And for me, that's kind of how it happened, but it was more of a fact that a friend came and said, hey, we'll do this together and we can do this. And at that point, your mind switches gear. But also, I think when you're in corporate America, your mind also switches gear, because you start getting exposed to many things. You start getting exposed to many companies, how companies work with each other, how companies worked when I was at Motorola. We saw all these companies working together and how the business model worked. And that, if you get interested in that, then you're on your way, because you have to have that interest. It's just like you have the interest for pure science, you have to have the same interest for this entrepreneurial search.
So you had the entrepreneurial bug in you all the time. Is that what made you sort of branch out and decide to really take that gamble and start your own company?
That's actually true. I think, I remember my father once asked me, he says, well, what are you going to do? He was a professor before, and he said, are you going to be? And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do business. And I remember as a kid, the kids I liked the most were the ones that would take things apart, be risky, do things, have mail routes. They were the ones I liked the most, because there was a thing that, hey, why are you doing that? And there was a spark in them that I thought was really kind of, it was enlightening or energizing. You see this, and that stayed with me. But I think really, if you don't come from a business background like I didn't, then it builds up slowly, and then I think there's a point where there's a a critical point where you can actually jump off and say, hey, we'll do this, and you're not worried.
So you helped to create a product for Motorola cell phone technology in the mid-1990s when cell phones were still the size of bricks. I got one of the first cell phones, car phone, of anybody I knew, and it was this big, and I could barely get it in my back seat. So it wasn't that long ago. Now, about 90% of Americans own a cell phone of some sort today, and 40% of those are smartphones, and that's growing by leaps and bounds. I think we had a story not too long ago. There's more iPhones sold this past quarter than there were babies born across the world. So it's an unbelievable, fast-paced growth. Was there a moment when you knew what you were working on would change the way that people live?
You know, you actually have a very good point, because when I was working on the cell phone technology, I didn't have a cell phone. And at that time, Motorola was very much pager-based. So everyone had a pager, and the paging division at Motorola was very big. But in those couple years, there was a real transformation in technology. And what happened is there were two things that happened. The materials that we used got much better. So you could get very efficient and smaller cell phones. At that point, it was well recognized this is what was going to happen. And I think it's like that tipping point where you realize once there's a point where you get to, it's either you're going to do it or someone else is going to do it, but it's going to get done. And that's very obvious when you see it. And, you know, the timing, who would have predicted it would have been that fast? But it was going to happen, and that's why, you know, it's best to really, when you get that opportunity, take everything, every initiative and energy you have to go into that.
So you're chairman of the Arizona Nanotechnology Cluster. Why is gathering industry and academic professionals together important for innovation?
Well, this is a very interesting thing. One of the problems that we've seen in science, and this has been a real problem in many of the research labs, is the science that is built is not generally commercialized at some point. So really what it is it's the merging of people having needs with what's out there. The scientists can tell you what you can do, but how do you know that's going to be a business? Let me give you an example. We were working on some laser technology, and we talked to the Mayo Clinic, a doctor there, and he said, if you can make this type of device that can be used portably, you could send this to third world countries, and that would be important because in third world countries, patients never come back. You know, if you have you're sick, you go see the doctor, you walked 50 miles to get there. And so he said this type of portable device is very important. We don't know these types of things, so when you take technologists and business people, that's really, and then you got to get the right kind of business people, and you got to get the right kind of technologists. Because you see, a technologist that's completely just a scientist, that doesn't work. You need a technologist that has that urge to say, you know, I got this, there's some application, and he's searching. And then you've got someone over here that's a business person that has a problem, and he's searching, and they're both willing to search. And that really makes the combination of the nanocluster work, because you got people of that type of attitude. And when they come together, now you can really get a solution, because really it's this curiosity or this real devotion to finding that. And that's very important.
So we all know how important education is and how vital it is to research. And what it means for our future. Yet we're having a hard time finding enough educated people to fill all the open jobs we have right now in research and science and engineering. In fact, there's a job fair right outside the theater tonight. So how can we engage the future to consider these careers? What would you advise those who are just getting ready to attend college now?
Well, I think I'd actually go before that, because you got to start at even young age. So we actually have outreach to the middle schools, and because one of the problems you get into is technology has progressed so far that a long time ago, you could say, I'm going to be an electrical engineer, and you could get a job. Nowadays, if they say you're an electrical engineer, you really can't get a job. You have to be an electrical engineer with a specialty in bio, or you have to be an electrical engineer with a specialty in solar. You have to be much more multidisciplinary. Now, the problem is if you go to college, to learn all of that in a 4-year is actually fairly hard, unless you're, very devoted like we have, But that's where you want to start young. So really, you've got to instill the inspiration in the youth and say, this is what we're doing, and, and we have all the tools now with, the internet. Information is so easy to get to these days that there should be no hindrance. But really, that's what it is. And then you have to show them that if you do this, you can do all sorts of things. And I've been all over the world to all the institutions in the world, and I'm telling you, creativity is the best in America. It is the best. However, that being said, China has 1.3 billion people. They may be 10 times less creative, but they've got, 5 times more, so you just can't say things like that, even though it's still true now. But with that really inspires me to think that the next generation of American kids and students are going to create the next technologies that will lead the world. And really, I think there has to be a little more inspiration to our youth instead of, and it goes from the whole community, I think. You have to, like this SciTech Festival, right? It's a community event. What it does is it promotes that science is important, it's interesting, and that we got to instill in the youth.
So I know I've seen 2 scientists in the crowd and like a half a dozen researchers. I know you're out there. So what would you tell them about starting their own business?
Well, there's a couple things. I think one is Arizona's a very interesting place. Arizona is probably one of the easiest places to start a business. Where Arizona lacks a little bit is there's a point where you have to go from the valley of, it's called the valley of death, where companies can almost get to a prototype, but they can't make any money. And that's where Arizona is a little bit lacking. But I see things that are happening in Arizona that will help it. But really, if you've got an idea and you want to go to the next level, you have to say to yourself, for one, you have to say you're just, I talk to professors and they go, oh, I want to start a company. I go, well, okay, this is what you do. You work for a couple years, half-time at your company and a professor, and then you got to quit your professor. And they go, I got to quit being a professor? And I go, yes. I mean, you have to kind of take this thing because at some point, necessity is the creator of the invention, because you got to be there at the point where you will not fail. You got to be at the point where you say, I will not fail. I remember when we won our first major contract with the Air Force. We were third on the, for one, they called us back and said, oh, we got some extra money, so we'll let you work on the project. So we were actually bombed. And then they told us we were third on the list. But we knew that we could not fail. And I think that's the attitude you have to have is, if you're going to do this, you have to do it in a way that you say, no matter what happens, I will not fail. And we won that major contract, even though we were just brand new, and even though the contract monitor said, it'll be a good experience for you. No, there's no such a thing as a good experience, unless you really, but I think if you take that attitude that you won't fail, and you might, but it's the attitude that you will do whatever it takes, and it will be for not lack of trying that you fail. That's the key, is you did everything, and at the end of the day, you can say, well, I did everything. And I believe if you do everything, you will succeed most of the time, but that's the entrepreneur. So a scientist has to say, you don't mind, weeks with no sleep, 120, 130-hour weeks, whatever. You do what it takes, but that's fun. I have to tell you, it's a lot of fun, because it's kind of like Lewis and Clark when they went out, and I think that's what, if any scientist has that bug, it'll be a great journey.
Does he have some passion or what? Why don't we thank him for that, huh?